the generosity of our partners in progress. Northwest Arkansas Community College, the College at the Crossing, Bella Vista Center, Envy Salon, specializing in cuts and color in Fayetteville, A.G. Russell Knives in Rogers, the Bank of Gravette, caretakers of the Arkansas spirit, the Tuscan Trotter American Brasserie, just off the square in downtown Bentonville, Discount Smokes and Liquors at the state line in Jane, Missouri, Hoffman Realty in Bella Vista. It's the Out of the Norm Show. Stories about people, places, things, and events from all across the great country of America. The Out of the Norm Show, where the stories are all about you.
Welcome to another version of the Out of the Norm Show. We're certainly glad you've decided to join us today. We're in a really interesting place here in southwest Missouri, the George Washington Carver National Monument. Beautiful place. In fact, Ranger Lana Henry is going to be taking us on a tour today and tell us all about Dr. Carver and learn a lot of different things. But first of all, we're kind of off the beaten path here in southwest Missouri. How many people do y'all have visiting here every year?
We have about 40,000 visitors each year.
But this is also a unique park in many ways, isn't it?
Absolutely. George Washington Carver National Monument has a few firsts. It is the first national monument in honor of an African American. It's the first national monument in honor of an agricultural scientist, and the first to honor an individual other than a United States president.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to find out a lot of other firsts on the trail. We're not going to take a break. In fact, we're going to keep walking. We're going to go right that way, and we'll be right on the trail and take you through American history today on the Out of the Norm Show, where the stories are all about you. Now, who would have thought in a little obscure piece of woods in a hot summertime in Missouri that we'd be in a most historic place? And here's Ranger Lana Henry. You're going to tell me all about this little spot that we're in.
Absolutely. We are standing on the site of George Washington Carver's birth site area. And the story begins back in 1838 when Moses and Susan Carver traveled west and settled right here in southwestern Missouri in what was known as Diamond Grove. So in time they had acquired 240 acres, which the national park owns today. It's the entire homestead of Moses Carver. And within time, let's go up a few years, a couple of decades, by 1855, Moses and Susan purchased a slave girl, a little slave girl, 13 years old, and all we know about her pretty much is that her name was Mary. Mary lived in a simple log cabin where we're standing today, and within time she had a first child named Jim, and a few years later she had another baby boy named George. And that's where our story of George Washington Carver begins.
Right here in the birthplace. Well, we've got a lot of story to see on this trail, don't we?
Absolutely. It's well, let me tell you one significant event that happened here in George's early years. In fact, it was not long after he was born. He was still an infant, we understand. And it would have been during, we believe George was born near the close of the Civil War, so that puts it in a timeline for us. But some raiders came through and actually kidnapped Mary, the slave mother. And she had George with her in her arms and just took them from the property. We understand, the story goes, that Moses and George's older brother Jim were out in the field and they actually saw the raiders come in and take Mary and George away. Now, Moses hired a scout from the Union Army named John Bentley, and the scout was able to find baby George, who had been left at a campsite, guess where? In the edge of Arkansas. Down in your home area.
Wow.
They did not find his mother Mary, and we do not know, just don't know the story of what happened to Mary. Why they kidnapped, what they did with her, but we do know that George never got to know his real mother.
But he was brought back to this area?
He was brought back to Moses and Susan, very sick. They say near death he had whooping cough. Susan Carver ended up taking him into their home, which was just nearby here, very simple cabin as well, and nursed him back to health. The Civil War closed. The boys are basically free. Jim and George are free. And they're raised in more of a foster parent situation by Moses and Susan right here on the Moses Carver farm.
Wow.
It's interesting to think about George as a young boy growing up on this farm we know that because he was sickly as a child, having had whooping cough and all that, that he ended up doing the household chores for Moses and Susan Carver up there in the Carver cabins. But in his spare time, he would come out and explore nature. Now, one of his daily chores was coming down this hillside to where the spring was located. There's several live springs on the property, and one is right here in the backdrop behind me. And of course, one of the reasons the Carvers chose this property was because of the natural resources, live springs and the creeks that's flowing through here. But in George's spare time, he would spend a lot of hours out here just exploring nature. And in time, he actually became known as a child as the plant doctor. The Boy Carver statue by Robert Amendola really helps to depict George Washington Carver's love of nature. You can see in his left hand how he is holding a small plant. There's a quote here by this statue that George said about his early years, and he says, "Many are the tears I have shed because I would break the roots or flowers of some of my pets while removing them from the ground. And strange to say, all sorts of vegetation seemed to thrive under my touch until I was styled the plant doctor." So he spent hour upon hour exploring the woods and enjoying God's beauty. Another time he said, "To me, my dear young friends, nature in its varied forms are the little windows through which God permits me to commune with Him and to see much of His glory, majesty, and power by simply lifting the curtain and looking in." More and more as we come closer and closer in touch with nature and its teachings, are we able to see the divine and are therefore fitted to interpret correctly the various languages spoken by all forms of nature about us. We have a contemplative loop around the Williams Pond, and we have several of Dr. Carver's quotes on wayside exhibits around the pond, where visitors can stop and read his words, connect him with this place, and then make a personal connection. How does his life impact me? And of course we have the backdrop of the beautiful Williams Pond behind us, and it just helps us to reflect upon our own lives and how he inspires us. Moses and Susan Carver built this house in 1881, and during that time, let's go back a few years to 1876 or 1877, George had already left the property to seek education, and we'll cover that in just a minute. But this gives you a backdrop of, this is actually a working farm. Moses and Susan Carver, and of course George and Jim here helping them on the farm. They had all kinds of animals. They raised all kinds of crops, from Irish potatoes and corn, wheat. They had sheep and had the wool. I mean, it was definitely a working farm. And we can understand from these formative years of George that this helped lead him into his choice of a career later. First of all, as he studied agriculture, and then as he took agriculture as a gift and a ministry to the people in the South that were in deep poverty. Many of George Washington Carver's playmates as a child are buried here in the Moses Carver Cemetery, as well as what he knew as his foster parents, Moses and Susan Carver. That's really all I have to say.
Well, we have sweated it out on the trails at George Washington Carver National Monument, haven't we, today?
It was lovely.
It was a nice walk through the woods,
Yes.
but just kind of get the feel of what Dr. Carver felt as a young child and what inspired him to become what he became.
Right, just retracing his steps.
But it went a little deeper than that, though, didn't it? Because now we're in a schoolroom.
Right.
Now, for a young boy who was born in 1864, coming out of slavery, a schoolroom was the farthest thing in the world that you would ever expect him to end up.
Absolutely.
How did all that happen?
Well, those walks through the woods out in nature certainly planted a thirst in him for an education. We understand that he actually taught himself to read through like the McGuffey readers. And then, of course, wanting to go to school, there was the Locust Grove School here locally in Diamond Grove. And he attempted to go there, but just was not accepted and was not allowed to go there. But that thirst was just undeniable. And within time, a school opened in Neosho, which is about 10 miles south of us. And it actually opened in 1872, but about 1876, 1877, he asked permission of Moses if he could go to the school, and was granted permission and walked the 8 to 10 miles to find the school, and that was his first attempt at public education.
Walking 8 to 10 miles?
Right.
So would he stay there for several days at a time?
Well, fortunately, Here's how the story goes. When he arrived the first evening, I guess there was a shed, a little barn out back and near the school, and he stayed there the first evening and then was out by a woodpile the next day. And some folks that lived next door to the school named Andrew and Mariah Watkins noticed him and went out to chat and understood that he had walked to school and had the desire to go to school, and they allowed him to live with them right next door to the school. And he would come home during recess and do work for them, and excuse me, it was actually just a real good experience. It was his first environment there with a black family and a black community, more or less, and started him out on his journey, his quest for an education.
And it carried on, but you know, again, we're talking about in the 1870s, post-war, but there was still a lot of problems with racism and things in those days too, wasn't there?
Absolutely. In fact, I'd like to go back just a little bit further and just share a little bit of Missouri history that's just interesting.
Sure.
I believe it was 1847 that Missouri had a law that actually made it illegal to teach blacks to read and write. And penalties, I mean, being put in jail and so forth. So by 1865, after the war, that's when we had revised the laws. So he had an opportunity, but yet it was not just an open door. And many, many obstacles stood in his way. In fact, the first school that we're talking about that he attended, the 1872 neo-colored school, had about 70 enrolled in a little, maybe 14 by 20 frame little house, school building. And that, we understand they must have had more than one session. They just couldn't squeeze that many in the session. But that's where he attended for about a year. In fact, he said that he learned all he could from his first teacher, Stephen Frost. Reasons for that? Black educators at the time weren't trained that well themselves in education. So he learned all he could, and then he actually hitched a ride on the back of a wagon with some folks that he heard were heading into Fort Scott, Kansas. So he moved to Fort Scott and there picked up his education once again.
Now, how old was he about that time?
I'm going to say early teens.
Oh, okay.
Maybe
so
13,
he was already
14,
old. Because kids
on his
who were
own.
13 years old, they were already working, weren't they?
Right. And
Yeah.
he had a little laundry business for himself up there in Fort Scott and put himself, was going through school. And things were going okay. And in fact, as you probably know, there was a huge migration of African Americans that had headed out of southwest Missouri into Kansas, and he was somewhat a piece of that. But one night there was just a terrible incident where he observed a lynching. And it's described just, it's brutally in the newspaper account how the white mob took this black man out of jail and beat him and hung him from a lamppost and lit him a fire. And George saw that and said he fled Fort Scott that very night.
Wow. And which direction did he go?
Well, he headed on through, excuse me, several small towns in Kansas. He stayed in Kansas for the most part. He had one little stint in Kansas City. He ended up in Minneapolis, Kansas, and met some wonderful friends that also helped to steer him in the right direction.
So, but he wasn't going to school at that time. Now, where does his formal education pick up from there?
Well, in Minneapolis, he actually finished his high school, and then he headed to college, believe it or not. He said, I'm going to do this. And he had applied to Highland College, which is in western Kansas, and was accepted, had his acceptance letter, and I understand he traveled by train and made it to Highland. But when he arrived, the principal saw that he was black and rejected him based on his race and said, you can't come to school here. Certainly, I don't know what terms we could say, disappointment and all the things that he felt. He went on to western Kansas for a while, right after that, and homesteaded and built his own house out of sod and stayed there a couple of years, and then just didn't give up on this thirst that he had for an education. He met a couple named the Milhollands, Dr. Milholland, once again back in Kansas, and they helped direct him. In fact, he met them at a church, and they heard his voice and invited him home to chat, and ended up just befriending them. But they helped direct him into school. One of his passions, his deep, deep passions that he loved, that I'm not sure a lot of people realize, is art. He had a lot of artistic talents, from music and instruments and just painting. So They helped him to enroll in Simpson College in Indianola, Iowa. And that was his first entry into education, and things were going well there. And his art teacher helped him kind of think through the whole art career idea and suggested that, George, maybe you need to think of something else. I mean, can you really make a living as a black artist in our day? And she had seen his work. A lot of his artistic work was botanical pieces, his drawings. And so they talked about botany and agriculture, and in fact, what he did was transfer to what we know as Iowa State University and finished his degree over there. He entered there in 1891, I believe.
And that was in agriculture?
Yes, has a degree in agriculture. He was the first African American at that school. He was the first African American to complete his bachelor's degree, the first to get his master's degree, and the first faculty member at Iowa State.
Wow, what an
Made it.
accomplishment.
He made it, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And it was there at Iowa State. I mean, he was just doing great, basically in a white man's world, achieving and being success. But he received a letter from Booker T. Washington, the founder of Tuskegee Institute, that invited him to come south.
And that's down in Alabama.
That's right.
Right.
And so he headed there in 1896, and that's where he began a 47-year journey, and basically what turned out to be educator and humanitarian.
But he was always a faithful man as well.
His entire path, in fact, he felt that he was being guided by God to this, the career choice that he made in the end, that it was all divinely guided. And he was very open to that.
And you told me a story earlier about that he was never married. And tell me that story again. I think that's a great one. And why his reason for not marrying.
We understand when he was asked about that he would say, what woman would want a husband that's getting up every morning at 4 a.m. to go out and take their nature hikes, which he did daily. He would go out and be with God in nature and commune, and what he said was get his orders for the day, and then come back into his laboratory and work. And he said, then I'd bring this mud into the parlor, and says, what woman is going to put up with that? So he did not marry.
Wow. Now we're going to go to Tuskegee. In fact, we're going to the laboratory, or at least a facsimile of, and we're going to do a little science today.
Good, let's have some fun.
We're not going to take a break, we're just going to take walking, so come on with us. We're going to go to the laboratory now.
Good.
Okay, so we've gone from the classroom of his early education, and now we're in Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. And this is a beautiful old laboratory that you have there. Now, it's not just a mock-up laboratory either, is it?
Well, it's a replica, and it also allows us, as the classroom space, we actually have thousands of school children come through where we can give them programs each year.
What kind of programs would you give in here?
We talk a lot about Dr. Carver, his I can spirit, those things that he overcame in life, and trying to impact everyone that comes through here with believing if you work hard enough, no matter what the obstacles, with faith, perseverance, and hard work, look what you can do with your life.
So, but in a laboratory very similar to this one, there were a lot of things that he created.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about some of those products, because I know we know most about the peanut, but also he did stuff with sweet potatoes and pecans. Tell me a little bit about those.
I think most people recognize when they hear the name George Washington Carver as the scientist.
Right.
And certainly, he did so much, and we'll talk about all the things he created from the byproducts he created, but really the neat story that we want to share with people is behind the scientific efforts. It's the why behind the science work.
Okay.
And we're going to do an experiment today with peanuts. Okay. We're going to actually have you help us make milk out of peanuts.
We're going to make milk
We're going to make milk out of peanuts.
Okay.
And as we're doing this, we're going to talk about, go ahead and crack one open here.
Okay.
Why in the world would, they're raw, I don't think you want to be eating those. You're going to, if you can, get the red skin off the peanut. Some of them are
like them raw.
more difficult than others, but if you can get the skin off. Now, George Washington Carver would have saved every little piece of...
He would have saved all the skin too?
Oh, the skin. He used this for everything from paper to linoleum on the floor. He used every fragment of the peanut. But in this case, we're going to get it down to the actual raw peanut.
Okay. So I'm going to
you can get a few of those into your...
Okay.
We're going to use mortar and pestles here and recreate making milk from the peanut. Okay. We understand George received word about just a poverty-stricken situation, desperate situation in the Belgian Congo. And there was a disease, an outbreak of the tsetse disease, which had impacted the cows, the goats, the mammal populations.
So that's a sleeping sickness from a tsetse fly, right?
Tsetse fly.
Right, okay.
We understand there was not enough milk being produced for the children. And he said, well, I can do something about that. I can do something about that. So this is a simple method. You know, if you think first, you know, what chemical process are we going to use to make milk out of a peanut? I think you'll be amazed at how simple he made this, and then how healthy and nutritious this is and was for those children. And it was something they could do themselves just with raw peanuts and water.
And raw peanuts and water, and they're skinned.
Yep. What you're going to do is take this and begin to crush them as finely as you can.
Okay. I have to get this skin off.
And if you miss it a little bit, that's fine. We're going to strain it out in a minute.
Okay, so we're going to mash up these peanuts.
Mash it, crush it.
I'm not very good at this.
And if you push it against the side, looky there. Oh, I may have to help him out here. Mine is coming along very well. Usually we'll do this with a classroom of 30 kids or so, and we're going to have an accumulation here of quite a bit of peanut meal. And today, for a very quick demo, we'll just... Safety glasses. Okay, once you get yours crushed, we'll add it to the beaker.
Okay, that'll be in the next show because it's taking me so long.
He's making progress.
I love peanuts, though. I mean, they're just, I mean, it's a great food source because they're so high in protein.
And that's what this is. I mean, he had a heart for humanity. And when he knew these children needed just basic nutrition, they can get it from a peanut. And instead of eating the peanut, you crush it, you mix it with the milk. Of course, it would have been boiled to sterilize it, and was a nutritious drink for starving, dying children. So far, so good. And then we're just going to add a little water.
Ooh, I'm going to break something here, aren't I?
Now,
because, look at it. It almost looks like milk now.
What you're going to do is you would shake this basically to act like if it was boiling, and it's going to continue to dissipate, and then you're going to strain it. And believe it or not, take this home and try it. And we can let this sit here a little while and see how it does.
Do you have to shake it up, though?
Shake it, yeah.
So we can cover it with this?
You can try that.
Hey, I'm a scientist.
You've got a little hole here, but that might work. Shift it around there a little bit.
Put a finger in there. Okay.
You can see it beginning to dissolve.
Right.
And before long, as it dissolves, you can go ahead and strain some of the yuck out of there. It looks a little watery right now, but the more you dissolve it, the more you beat it up,
it becomes a little thicker?
Yes, you will have milk.
Okay, now
you see the start of that now?
Now what is it? What is it though? I mean, it's not an oil.
It's a you know, as far as milk, it's high in value. The only downside now is we're pretty much fat-free. It does have a lot of fat in it. So
yeah, but if you're in an impoverished country, that fat's necessary. So it's high protein.
Excuse me. Now you can take this milk, and you know you've seen cow's milk, and the butter will rise, the oils will rise to the top. Oh my goodness! And you can skim that off and make butter. So yes, you can have butter.
Really, you can make butter out of it. Pull the fat off.
There you go.
What an interesting thing.
One of many things, many byproducts that he created from peanuts. You know, when he got to Alabama, what he saw was rather shocking with, you know, the old southern cotton and how they just depleted the nutrients from the soil.
Right.
So he just went about teaching them, basically one farmer at a time, through his classroom and then through taking his Jessup wagon out through the countryside, teaching the families, one family at a time, how they could improve their lifestyle, how they could plant this in their fields, and how they could improve. He even came up with paints out of pigments of the soil, and they could improve their households with simple things. He was very much into nutrition. So
crop rotation was his discovery and his...
He actually...
one of the things that he came up with.
I wouldn't say it was his discovery, but he did share it, that concept with the Southern folks that really needed the education.
And he only got a patent on 2 things that he
2 or 3,
created out of
right.
all these years.
That wasn't his interest. Material things was not what interested him. He wanted to help people.
And those patents were on a paint product and...
Now, he did start a little, for a time, he started a little bit of cosmetics. That was another thing he derived. And
that came from
worked with
peanuts as
someone,
well?
Absolutely. All-purpose cream, antiseptic soap,
I may need to do a little...
face cream, face powder, all kinds of ointments, hand lotions, and tried to considered marketing those, but that didn't go. He didn't pursue that. So.
Now, what about the sweet potato? Because he worked with that a lot as well.
Absolutely. The sweet potato, you know, we're talking about things that put nitrogen and nutrients back into the soil.
Right.
And he taught them how to rotate those things. And then he worked with them, you know, just like the peanut. After he convinced them to plant peanuts, there was an abundance of peanuts bursting, I guess, from barns and so forth.
Right.
And that's why he went into what he called God's little workshop and began to ask God to tell him, you know, how can we take what we have now and use it? And came up with all these hundreds of uses, practical things.
Well, one of my favorite uses of peanuts is boiled peanuts. It's not very scientific, but it sure is good.
That's good.
All right. Well, this has been most interesting and exciting. It's a man that, not just from the products he made, but the actual, the creative spirit of him and the just desire to serve. It's what I hear from the whole story that we've gotten today here, is his desire to serve mankind in one special way and to use his gifts to the fullest of his abilities.
I think you've nailed it there. That pretty much defines him, wanting his life to be of service to others.
Well, this has been wonderful. I really appreciate you taking the time and showing us around. Now, we're at the George Washington Carver National Monument in Diamond, Missouri.
You're here.
It's about 10 miles south, or tell us where we're located.
Okay,
exactly.
we're about 15 miles southeast of Joplin.
Okay.
And we're just down in the corner of Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, just nestled down here in the corner.
Now, the center is open what day?
We're open every day from 9 until 5.
From 9 till 5.
Every day. We're closed a couple of major holidays.
Right, and there's no admission.
Absolutely free. And we give education programs. We give guided tours of the trail. The museum's just outstanding. A theater, show films on his life. It's a beautiful place.
Now, also, we were talking about educational. We mentioned earlier that some of the homeschooling groups from around the country have made this part of their educational curriculum as well, right?
Right. We have several curriculum programs based on different age groups. We have a plant doctor program, 19th century living program, the Carver ICANN program, a variety of programs that teachers can call, families can call, and we'll get you reserved and provide ranger guided curriculum programs.
Wow, that's great. What a great place. Really a wonderful place.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank Lana Henry for being our guide and tourist guide. Not only that, but our instructor today, and also my co-scientist as we were making milk. Could you put chocolate in this, you think?
I think that might be wise.
Oh, wow. We want to thank you for joining us, too, because today has been a very important part of our curriculum. One of the reasons I was motivated to come here is because my little granddaughter, Hannah, who's 12, was reading a book about George Washington Carver, and it brought back some memories for me when I was in elementary school about the man, and I really didn't understand the depth of his life and the importance he plays in our lives, even now as we go into the 21st century. Now, one of the things I would recommend to you is get a book. You can go online. There is a website for the museum here, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Okay, and it is at?
GWCA/NPS.
GWCA/NPS at
.gov.
.gov. At .gov. Okay. All right. So we'll help you do that. We'll put that on the screen for you so you can write that down. And if you're traveling through this part of Missouri, we hope that you'll stop and take a visit. I think you'll enjoy it. In the meantime, we thank you again for being a part of the Out of the Norm show today. It's been a really fun and hot time outside in this summer of 2011. But I've really enjoyed it and learned a lot about someone that I need to know about, and you too. In the meantime, come back and see us again real soon, because we're going to be back in your home with another story. Because after all, on the Out of the Norm show, the stories are all about you.
You can't go far from things that are so dear and true, like loving the South and me just loving you. You can't go far from things that are so dear and true, South and the